Hey there, I'm Brittany Smith, and you're watching Filmmaker Symposium. So today we're going to continue our series on story structure, and we're going to talk about story sequences and acts. Now, if you didn't see the previous episodes, we talked about scenes, beats, and story events in the previous 2 episodes. So be sure to go back and watch those if you have not watched them yet. So what exactly is a story sequence? I feel like when I read about story structure and I research it, there's not a whole lot about story sequence. It seems like it's kind of pushed to the side, and you read more about acts and you read about scenes, but not a whole lot about story sequence. So story sequence, according to my reading and my research, is a string of scenes that lead up to a scene of greater impact. So the scene of greater impact is most likely going to be a plot point, and we haven't really talked about plot points yet, but we will talk about plot points in the future. Just know for now that a plot point is a major change in your story. So sequences, just like scenes, have a beginning, middle, and end. The beginning is kind of like a mini inciting event, and then your middle is kind of like the complication, and then the end is the crisis / climax / resolve. So your sequence is kind of like its own mini short story, actually. So I'm going to use Red Riding Hood as an example once again. I've been using Red Riding Hood quite often with my other videos. If you remember from last time, we developed a scene where the wolf comes into contact with Red Riding Hood, and we kind of went over the beats that go back and forth to create that scene. Well, now I'm going to use that same scene, but I'm going to create a sequence out of it rather than just a scene. So my first inciting incident scene is going to be kind of changing things up a little bit with Red Riding Hood. It's not going to be your typical Red Riding Hood story, but the inciting event is going to be her and her mom are at home and they're discussing going to grandma's house. They're getting ready to go, and then all of a sudden her mom mentions something about, I just want to keep you safe and make sure that you're going to be okay. And Red Riding Hood kind of pushes back against that and goes, well, I'm old enough to handle myself. I don't need you to walk with me. So they kind of squabble back and forth, and then at the end of that scene, Red Riding Hood's mother says, well, okay, if you're old enough, just make sure that you stay on the path and you don't talk to strangers. So she kind of trusts her daughter to do this on her own, and so her daughter leaves the house and goes on her way. Now, if you remember, every scene has to have a change, and the change that happens in this scene is Red Riding Hood goes from being an obedient child to being somewhat of a contentious child, and then there's contention between her and her mother. So that's the change that happens with Red Riding Hood. And the change that happens with her mom is she goes from being nervous to being a little bit less nervous, or maybe she's going from being controlling to less controlling. You could go many different routes with this particular circumstance. But the next scene is going to be the complication scene. So Red Riding Hood is on her own. She's feeling very confident, and she decides to take a shortcut. She knows it's more dangerous, but she knows she can handle herself, so she goes down this dangerous road. So there's a poor man waiting outside of this hut, and it's his hut, but he calls out to her and says that his dog needs help because his dog is wounded inside. And she responds and says, I'm not supposed to talk to strangers, and she starts going on her merry way. Well, then he comes after her and tries to grab her. And she actually kind of goes through a little fight with him and then escapes from his grasp and runs off. But as she's running off, she leaves her basket behind that she was supposed to bring to her grandmother's house. So that would be our second scene. And the change that happens in this scene is, there's several different things, but she goes from being in danger to being not in danger because she was in that man's grasp and then she escaped from the man's grasp. Now the next scene would be the crisis / climax scene. And in this scene, we see her crying on a rock, and she's traumatized by what just happened, and she's trying to pull herself together. She does not have her basket. Well, the wolf saw the whole thing, and he actually goes and gets the basket, and comes to visit her and tries to comfort her on the rock. He says, "Oh, poor child, what is wrong?" and tries to befriend her and deceive her. And she refuses his attempts, but then the wolf keeps trying and finally shows her that he actually brought her basket. So then he asks her where she's going, and now she trusts him because she feels like he has her best interest in mind. So she tells him where she's going, and he says he's just going to watch over her and protect her. So that is our resolve scene in this sequence, because now she's in danger because she has revealed to the wolf where she's going. She actually did talk to a stranger. She's already gone off the path, and this is like the big event where now things are changing because she did not obey her mother, and now she's in danger. So we have this big sequence where she went from being safe to unsafe in this kind of climactic sequence that happened. Now, this is obviously not the best sequence that you can come up with. I'm sure you could come up with something even better than me, but just for the sake of describing what a sequence is, I thought I would just use an example of Red Riding Hood. So the next thing I want to talk about are story acts. So what is a story act? And if you've done any study on screenwriting, this would probably be the thing that you would know most. But a story act would be a combination of sequences that we just talked about, combination of sequences that build up to major plot points. So we're talking about like the beginning plot point and the middle and the end. So an act would be, the first act would be like the setup of your story, and then that inciting event, the major problem that the story is dealing with, is introduced. And then your second act would be trying to figure out how to solve the problem that was presented with this inciting event. And then the climax would be the resolve to that problem. So story acts are pretty straightforward. It's basically the macro version of scenes, sequences, and every other part of story structure. But acts are super important because all throughout history we've had acts. Shakespeare is one of the major kings of developing acts and stories, and all the writers that you read have acts as well. So very important aspect of story structure. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to subscribe and like this video and keep up with everything that's coming out. Now, if you want more information regarding story structure, I've put some links below to some books that have been really helpful for me, so you can go ahead and check out those books and order them if you want to. But I hope to see you next time on Filmmaker Symposium.